Hi, I'm Gautam Sinha, the CEO and co-founder of CBREX. I have been in the talent acquisition space for over 2 decades now. A friend of mine called Jess and I decided to put together a podcast called Talent Trailblazers, right? In which we will talk to various talent acquisition professionals who have literally transformed this function in their respective organizations. In each episode, right, I will bring you face to face with some really awe inspiring entrepreneurs, CXOs, and HR leaders, right, who have challenged conventional norms and carved a name for themselves in the talent acquisition space. For the first episode that we are going to be showing you now, Jess's idea was that he and I do an episode together in which Jess will be the host and I will be the guest. In the episodes going forward, I will be hosting the Talent Trailblazers podcast, and we will have other guests. So over to Jess to take over this episode.
Really excited on this episode to have Gautam Sinha, founder CEO at CBREX or CBREX. Gautam, thanks for doing this.
Thank you. Great to be here.
It's been fun to get to know you a little bit. I got to say I'm pretty fascinated with your model. For people who don't know what cross-border recruiter exchange is, can you explain CBREX?
Sure. So primarily, CBREX is a vendor management system, VMS, which is powered by a marketplace, and this marketplace is cross-border recruiter exchange that you were mentioning. So on top of it, there is a vendor management system through which companies deal with multiple vendors, and vendors meaning sourcing partners or recruiting agencies, right? And these agencies are a part of a huge marketplace, which has more than 3,500 agencies in that marketplace. And these agencies are based in various parts of the world, right? So, and the last count, it was across 90 countries. So when we are saying cross-border, what we basically mean is that if a job opens up in Manhattan, right, posted by a company in Manhattan, looking for talent in Manhattan, the agency which sources that talent can be based in the Philippines. And that's the cross-border element of it, right? So the job is in Manhattan, talent is in Manhattan, but the agency sourcing for it is based in Philippines, right? Because all talent sourcing is done through the internet, right? So there is really no locational advantage for an agency to be based in Manhattan to source talent in Manhattan, right? And that's the big breakthrough here, right? So, and that's what you are saying, the cross-border recruiter exchange basically means that, right? And that's what the marketplace is built upon.
Well, I think what's so interesting to me is like, for a lot of our jobs, it's just something on LinkedIn or whatever. But like, I think about when we've hired senior executives at companies I run in the past, and we're paying like, I think we paid like $100,000 or $125,000 each to find a couple of guys one year, right? And as I was learning more about your model, thinking like, yeah, why do I have to pay somebody from North America those rates to find that executive if there's someone as talented but lives in a lower cost basis? Like, if I could have found those same executives for half price, like I totally would have done that, right?
Yeah.
And it's like this mental concept of like recruiting was such an in-person and a phone call thing, and for so many decades, like for me, I had never considered having somebody from really any other country who has a competency of working with Americans. Like, why do I care? Like, why do I care where my recruiter sits as long as I get the candidate that I want in the city that I want, right?
Correct. So there are two aspects to it, yes. One is the fact that recruiting and most of B2B businesses are very location-based. So think about it, right? If you're using a marketing agency, using a PR agency, right, tend to use it from your city or from your state, or at least in your neighborhood, like, somewhere in your country, right? There are very few times that you would go cross-country, right? And that's the basic difference, right? So as you rightly said, if I'm hiring in Manhattan, right, why would I need the recruiter to be in Manhattan? The sourcing agency can be based anywhere else, provided, I'm getting the right kind of talent, right? And because these agencies or recruiters are based in low-cost countries, the cost of doing business is far lower. And because of that, they're able to provide the same kind of quality talent, but at a much lower price, right? And that's typically what CBREX facilitates. So CBREX is basically democratizing the whole talent sourcing industry. Today, the talent sourcing industry is completely based on location. If I'm in Manhattan, I have a customer in Manhattan, or if I'm in New Jersey, then most of my customers are in Jersey or in New York, and that is what we are trying to break. Because actually speaking, location should not determine your customer, right? In a model of today where it's so internet based, everything should be based on performance, not on location, right? So if you're a good agency or if you're a good recruiter based in any part of the world, right, you should have access to customers in Manhattan or in New Jersey, right? Even though you're not based here, right? So that's really the key, the key differentiator that we are trying to create, and therefore flattening the whole world, so as to say, right, when it comes to the talent sourcing piece. And that is why the example that you gave, which is $100,000 that you spent to hire a couple of executives, if you were to do it on our platform, you'd probably spend 1/3 that amount, right? And that's really the main, the main value proposition.
So I know we've talked a little bit about this before, but when you think of like that ideal company spending, I don't know, I think you told me like maybe 1 to 5 million a year on talent acquisition. Is that kind of the sweet spot? Is that kind of who you're going after?
Yeah. So the companies which are spending about $1 million upwards, right, in sourcing through vendors or in sourcing through recruiting agencies, typically would love our platform, because they would then have multiple vendors whom they can consolidate because it's a VMS. And the kind of cost savings that we would bring them would be fairly substantial. Like we can reduce the budget by 50 to 60%. $1 million company, $1 million spend could become $500,000, and that is attractive. And then more importantly, we cut down their time to hire, right? Because they are now accessing multiple partners, right, on a platform. So today, if they take a month or a month and a half to close a position on the platform, they would do it in 10 to 15 days, because that's the kind of access to talent that they will have, right? And the beauty of it is, and that's really the killer app, today, if their recruiters spend, say, 45 to 65 minutes a day talking to vendors, sourcing the resumes from vendors, giving feedback to vendors, that will come down to maybe 10 to 15 minutes. So imagine you are reducing your cost, you're getting far more access to talent, therefore you're reducing your time. And you're also you're increasing the efficiency of your internal recruiters, who today are spending maybe 60, 65 minutes a day, dealing with vendors, dealing with multiple vendors, who then start spending 50 to 20 minutes a day, maybe even lesser.
Yeah.
Right. So on all fronts, right, the organization is gaining, right? And that's the beauty of the VMS backed by the marketplace or backed by the cross-border exchange, as you rightly said.
Yeah.
Right. Because you need both to really be able to deliver, right, on all fronts, not only on cost, but also on efficiency and time.
So what size of organization is spending that kind of money on vendors? Like, is it like 2,500 employees to 5,000? Like, what's kind of the ideal band?
So the revenue bands are starting at about 250 million. If your revenue is in that range, it could be slightly smaller, 200 million. Typically, these companies are about 500 to 1,000 people, right? And I could be off the mark, plus minus 10%. Going all the way up to, our sweet spot is 250 million to 5 billion, right? So starting at about 500 people all the way up to 5,000, or even 10,000 people, right? These are the companies, who really need a system like ours, because today they are bleeding, right? If you're too small, then you're better off dealing with a couple of vendors, and because your spends are not large enough as yet to justify, moving to a platform and getting a VMS with a marketplace and so on. So that's where, if you're like hiring 5 or 10 people a year, then maybe you're better off dealing with the agencies that you are today.
Yeah.
Right. Unless there are, a lot of growth plans that you have where you want to hire maybe 50 people a year, then maybe you need something like our system. But 5-10 people a year, you really don't need it.
Yeah. And you're saying 200 and 250 million revenue per year, company valuation.
No.
Yeah.
This is all revenue.
Yeah. So, again, I love the, this idea that so many of us are so ingrained in the old system, even though there's new possibilities. And it seems like you guys are positioned to do really well taking advantage of that. But I want to talk about some other things too. This is far from your first entrepreneurial venture. Um, I know I can't remember the name of where you were born, but you were raised in Delhi, correct?
That is correct.
So maybe
That
one
is
of my
correct.
first questions, we've had so many incredible entrepreneurs raised in India on the show. What do you think some of the advantages were growing up in India as an entrepreneur for what you're doing now?
I think for me, the timing was right because when I graduated business school, Indian economy was just opening up, right? So this was post 1991. Before 1991, starting a business in India was very difficult because the economy was very small and really not conducive for business. So I think I started my career in 94, and that's when the Indian economy opened up, right? And that's when I could become an entrepreneur. I became an entrepreneur very quickly. Like I started my first company when I was 24 years old, right? So the environment in India at that time was really changing, right? We were moving from a very quasi-socialist, controlled economy to a very market-driven, open capitalist economy, right? And therefore, that timing was excellent, right? From a starting up perspective, right? But still, in the 90s, India was not as entrepreneurial as it is today, right? Today, of course, it's a different ball game, right? With the internet coming in such a big way. This is like pre-internet, right? So we were still operating on email. So I think there it was still, not as common as it is today. But at least I think had I been born like 10 years earlier, then maybe, it wouldn't have happened because the economy would have been such that starting a business would have been very, very difficult, right? Unless you have something from the past, which I did not. I'm a first generation entrepreneur. I don't have a legacy which I'm carrying on. So yeah, that was some of the. I think the timing was interesting, right, at that particular point in time, to really get off and start a venture.
Yeah. I mean, I know nowadays, obviously, you've got recruiters in all these countries. You guys have an office in Manhattan, as well as staff in India. Well, actually, there's something else. So we haven't talked about this, but I was listening to some interviews of yours. So I didn't realize that your dad worked for the government. Like same thing. I didn't come from an entrepreneur family. My dad worked for the government. My mom was a nurse, and like all my entrepreneur stuff has just scared him to death over and over. And when I called up to say I was dropping out of university to start a business, my dad kind of hyperventilated and hung up the phone. you know, and sounds like your dad wasn't quite as excited either.
Yes, yes, because as you rightly said, I mean, there was no entrepreneurship in the family, right? So it was either working for the government or working for the private sector. But starting something on your own was like unheard of, right? I think for me, I think the biggest advantage was that I was very, very young. So when you're young, you can take a lot of risk, right? Because your cost structures are low, right? You don't spend that much of money, right? And as you grow older, that keeps changing, right? Your needs become more. So when you're younger, this is what I keep telling people whom I talk to, and I mentor a lot of entrepreneurs who reach out to me on LinkedIn, right? That what, the earlier you start, the better it is, right? Don't delay. If you really want to start a company, then 20s are really, really good, right? Because your costs are low, right? And therefore, you can withstand shocks for a longer period of time. So suppose you don't make cash for a year, and you're 25 years old, 24 years old, it doesn't matter that much. But if you're 35 years old or if you're 45 years old, it matters a lot, right? Because you have more responsibility, your outflows are much at a different stage in life. So the key is to start really early, right? I think the earlier you start, the better it is. And the other thing which, is very interesting is that you can't ask if you want to start, right? I mean, a lot of people I talk to, and they're like asking me, I'm like, hey, you know what? It's not my idea. It's not my company, right? I cannot tell you. Nobody can, right? If you're an entrepreneur, you just know right? You need to get it from within. You can't be asking other people, is this a good idea? What do you think about it? I mean, I have no problem. You can take advice from as many people as you want. But end of the day, the more people, you rely on for advice on this particular aspect, like on starting, the longer you're going to take, right? Because people have different views and, you'll just get confused, right? I think the key is like start quick and start young, right? And start fast,
Or if
right?
you're not,
Don't waste time asking too many people.
or if you're not young, start now, right?
Start now.
Um,
Yeah. Anytime is good, right? Yeah.
So, can you tell us a bit of this journey of, startup entrepreneur in India, have the big successful exit, become an investor, and then come back to being an entrepreneur again with CBREX?
Yeah, that was funny. So, so I exited my last company, and I did several which failed before that. But I exited a company in 2008, right? And that's when you exit a company. That's when you make, that's when you have entrepreneurial success, right? Before that, it's like you're just an entrepreneur, right? So that was good. I mean, that really boosted a lot of my bank balance as well as my confidence. And after that, I didn't do anything for a very long time. So I was just investing in other companies. I was like an angel investor. But I read 400 books, okay, in a matter of 5 years. There is no topic on earth which I have not read on, right? And I'm talking everything from quantum mechanics to philosophy to psychology to evolution to everything, to philosophy, and all kinds of philosophy. Oriental philosophy, Western philosophy. It was probably the most enlightening period of my life, right? I still think maybe I overdid it. Maybe 400 was too much. Maybe I should have got back to starting a company earlier. But it was like just a moment in life, where I was just absorbing information and turning it over in my head. And then finally, the lack of doing something really got to me. And then I started this company, CBREX, in 2015, 16, right? But on a completely different scale than what I did my previous venture. Right. The domain was similar because that's my domain and I know that very well, which is the recruiting and staffing domain. But the scale and the way I went about it was completely different from what I had done in the past. And I could do that because I took that 5-year break, where although I was a part of the industry, but actually I was not. I was looking at it from the outside, right? And sometimes that's the big difference, right? Disruptions are normally not caused by insiders. And if you look at any industry in the world, I'm talking, not talking B2C, I'm talking B2B, right? B2B disruptions. You look at plastic, you look at steel, you can look at shipping, you can look at airline. Typically, if you want to disrupt an industry, like disrupt it completely, it's typically done by people from outside because they're able to look at stuff which the insiders are not aware of. For me, I think that 5 years gave me that perspective to look at recruiting and staffing from the outside, right? So I was looking outside in, right? Even though I was a part of that industry and I've been a part of the industry ever since 1996, right? But because I took that break and I looked at it from outside in, I think I could figure out how to disrupt, right? And use my domain knowledge along with the, that break and, that perspective. And I think CBREX today, and the reason I'm exceptionally happy with it is because it is completely going to disrupt the supply chain, talent supply chain, as I call it, right? That is going to be disrupted by CBREX. And that, if you ask me, was a product of that 5 years.
Well, I've benefited a little bit from your 5 years because you talked me into reading Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And that's a really great book. Like my, listeners know that I'm a real audiobook nerd. That's what I've heard of so many times, but I just, for whatever reason, it never really struck a chord with me until we started talking. I was like, okay, I'm going to read it. And I'm loving it.
Yeah, it is. It's a fantastic, right? And there is so much knowledge which is simple, right? And that's been one of my biggest learnings, that knowledge, if knowledge is complicated, then it's not worth learning, right? Knowledge has to be simple. right? And that's what we call wisdom, right? And I think Zen is in that category. Zen in the art of motorcycle maintenance is like just a book full of wisdom, and it's so simple to read. It's not complicated. The language is simple. Thought is simple. The main idea is very simple. So yeah, that's what makes that book so special.
Yeah, on the podcast yesterday, I had this mega best-selling author, Nir Eyal. He taught at Stanford. He writes for Forbes and Fast Company, all this stuff, and sold 2 tech
Yeah, I've read
companies.
a couple of those books.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah, I've
he's
read a couple.
invested in like 5 or 6 unicorns, and it was kind of my big compliment for him. So he's got this great book called Indistractable. It has like 23,000 reviews. Read another one that I really love called Hooked, maybe 40,000 reviews about how do you make it habitual,
Yeah,
right?
that's the famous one. Yeah, I've read that.
Yeah. So kind of like my compliment to him was it's almost like he reached simplicity on the other side of complexity. Like it wasn't simplistic. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't just surface level. Like he went through the surface level to the deep stuff and learned it so well that he could explain it in a way that's so simple it was actually useful for me getting exposed to it for the first time. Right?
Correct. So I mean, one of the guys that and one of the biographies that I really loved was Einstein's biography, written by Walter Isaacson.
Okay.
Right? And Walter Isaacson has written some great books. And I think it's just called Einstein is Universe, something, right? That name. And one of the things that Einstein says, and which really makes sense, is that if you can't answer a question in a simple fashion, right? Like if you can't take complex thought and explain it simply, then you don't know what you're talking about, right? That's the key, right? Most people really don't know the depth of what they are trying to explain, right? And that's something which comes out with so brilliantly in that biography, right? I think there's a line which says, "The answer is simple: God is talking," right? Or something to that effect. So yeah, yeah. So yeah, it's that's the key, right? Taking complex thought and making it simple is really the key to writing a good book.
Yeah. Well, I guess if you started in 94, next year will be 30 years in business for you. Is that right? As an entrepreneur?
Yeah.
So thinking about all of the complexity you've been through, one of my favorite things to ask really successful entrepreneurs on the show is this idea that as founders, we're constantly being told, you need product market fit, you need to improve your product market fit, you need to get better at product market fit. But the definitions can vary so much. I'm interested in your mind, how do you define product market fit?
I think there are two, at a very simple level, if you start getting references from your current users, then you have a product market fit, right? Like if you don't need to sell, right? Like if you are using my product, right, and you love it so much that you tell 5 other people about it, right? And they start coming, they start using your name, saying, "Hey, Jess just referred me to you, and I want to use your product." To me, that really defines product market fit, because then what is happening is that you obviously love love the product, and you love it so much that now start telling other people about it, right? So that's at a very simple level, but of course there are many complex definitions of the product market fit, because as you rightly said, that's the holy grail, right? I mean, PMF is what everybody's talking about. But in my mind, if you start getting references, they are fine. And the key is that people should love your product, right? I don't think like is good enough, right? Liking a product is still, in my mind, is not product market fit. And I need to love what you have built, right? And that's really the other aspect. And believe me, it's not that difficult to get, right? You will understand when people start loving your product, right? Rather than just liking it. And referencing is one aspect of it, because nobody will refer you if they don't love your product, right? But I think there are other ways to get that in. A lot of it also through user interviews, but I think that's the second aspect of it, right? Once you start getting that, then just need to repeat it over and over again. I mean, the key is that you should have enough users of that profile to be able to scale, Like you get a user who loves your product and is able to give you references, but you know what? There are only 20 such users in the world. Then it's going to be difficult, right? But as long as the replication is possible over a wider universe size, I guess PMF should be fine.
Well, I want to talk about this idea of like, you created a product that people love so much that they're willing to give a referral, and it's such a good referral that the person actually buys it. Like, it wasn't just a referral; it was an effective enough referral that they become a customer as well.
Correct.
If you had advice for CEOs today or founders today who are saying like, our stuff is good, like people like our stuff, but I don't know that I've reached the level of love for our stuff that I think I want to get to. What advice do you have on levers they can pull, or mental models they could think about to become more objective about their product, or tools to help them improve their product market fit?
So I think at the heart of it is the problem that you're solving. Right? Is it a time problem or is it a cost problem? Right? Are you saving time or are you saving money? Are you saving both? Right? Because if you really start distilling, and I'm talking B2B here, most products are falling in either of these two categories. Right? Either I'm saving time using that product or I'm saving money. Right? And that's 90%. So the real key is if you're saving time, then how much? Right? Like if today I spend half an hour doing it, then do I spend 3 minutes doing it? That's like huge time. I mean, 30 minutes to 3 minutes, that's like 90% of my time gets saved. Or do I save like 30 minutes becomes 25 minutes? That's okay. It's not really, and the same with cost, right? Today, if I'm spending $100, then do I start spending $10, $20, or do I start spending $90? So what's the real benefit here, right? On time and cost, right? If you have an answer there, right? Like if you can quantify the answer, then I think it's easier. And to get back to the mental model, I think the key is to be able to get to that answer, right? Like what's the real benefit, right? In somebody using the product, right? And how much are they really saving on time and money, right? Then I think one can work from there. But in most cases, a lot of the products, and I also see a lot of them, and a lot of people pitch to me because we are also using a lot of products as we scale, is that they really haven't like they're saving. They're what I call ornamental, right? I can do without them, right? Yeah, I mean they have some benefit. I'm not saying they don't have any benefit, but it's really not deep, right? It's not really moving mountains, right? So then my adoption rate or my response will also be fairly lukewarm, right? So that's really that's the real key according to me.
Okay, that's a fascinating filter to put things through. Like I'm thinking about my one company, the media company, Greystoke Networks, and like as you're saying that, I'm thinking about some conversations I had with CEOs last week. Of it makes me, well, I'd be interested if you see it differently, but it makes me think that I am in the time saver category, because it's like, hey, in the early years, you're probably closing all the enterprise accounts yourself as the founder and stuff. But like once you start raising money, or once you start doing big enough revenues, at some point, most CEOs realize I need to embrace this position as like the spokesperson of the company, amplify the message of the company, be the face of the company, and kind of that like leverage of like, I can say stuff once as a thought leader, as a face of the company, and then that can help attract customers and top talent and investors, and like, becomes a high leverage thing. And it makes me think, I think I'm a time saver of like, hey, we will find you the super high profile people for your show. You don't have to travel around to conferences. You don't have to wait to get picked by the media. Like you become the media because we find you really high profile people for your show, and you get to stay home. You don't have to do any of that prep work, and then you don't have to do anything afterwards. It's like the low frustration, like just do the fun part of talk to a high level peer. Or do you see it differently? Do you think maybe do you think it's not as much of the time saver?
No, I think in your business model, at least the one that I'm interacting with you on, I think you're also very cost efficient, right? I think it's a bit of both. I think the way you've structured your commercial model, the money is also fairly efficient.
Because normally they'd have to they'd have to take the time and money to travel to conferences to meet those kind of clients, and they'd have to do all sorts of other
Correct.
things.
And you end up spending much more money,
Okay.
right? Yeah, you end up spending much more money, right? And that's also very critical. Which I'm saying. So if you look at time and cost, and if you're doing both, right? So I'm not disagreeing with your time analogy. I think that's correct analogy because it accelerates, right? Which you rightly said. But I'm saying the killer app is because your product does both, and that's really what makes it exciting, right? Had it only been time and not the money, it wouldn't have been as attractive, right? Because end of the day, I mean, money is important,
Yeah.
right? So so I think there that's where it scores. So it will be a take on both.
Well, and I'm interested, like, the world of talent acquisition that you know so well. Like, where do people meet like a giant enterprise account who is spending $3 million a year or something on external vendors? Like, is it conferences? Is it like, how do you meet those hard to reach decision makers in your world?
So typically, conferences is one, but of course, because of COVID in the last 2 years, that has been pretty much zero, right? But a lot of content marketing,
Yeah.
right, is typically what is used, and not only by us, by any organization in the space, or rather any B2B company trying to target enterprise accounts.
Yeah.
Right. So content marketing is important, and now all of us are on the internet all the time, right? So we are consuming content like 5x, right? What we used to consume maybe 5 years ago, right? Or maybe 10x. I don't even know. So I think the key right now is that, right? Like, what kind of interesting content can you create, which is relevant to your industry, and which is relevant to the reader that you're targeting, which is your customer audience, right? And does that tickle the person's brain enough so that they can go out and probably go to your website or read something else about you. But that, according to me, would be fairly critical. I think the conferences piece, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's not relevant, but it's slightly pre-internet. I think now, as the internet is becoming so all pervasive, right, and now that the virtual world is pretty much interfacing with the physical world, like almost like seamlessly, right? I would still think that a lot of it done through the internet would be more time efficient than the older route of doing content. Both don't happen that frequently. Right.
Okay, I love the advice. So the CEO I was meeting with on Friday, built $100 million company. We were having a kind of a similar conversation. He was quoting from a different Steve Jobs book, not the Walter Isaacs one, but it's the reporter who interviewed Steve Jobs more than anybody else in the press. He wrote a book about Steve Jobs, and I wish I could remember the quote exactly, but he said something about like that the main jobs of the CEO, as far as he was concerned, were to be to bring like vision and direction to the company, and to make sure you've got enough money, and to get people talking about the business, and probably yourself, so you get like the halo effect as the CEO to give to the business, right? So thinking about making sure the company's got enough money, I mean, pretty much two options for most. It's either customers or investors, or maybe like in the States, you can get some non-dilutive funding from a CBR grant from the Department of Defense or something, okay, right? But if you can't get grants for a business, which most of us can't, customers or investors, we've talked about product market fit and making something that customers love so much they'll get other customers for you. But let's talk about investors. I listened to an interview you did with one of your investors, and when you think about this idea of getting somebody to write a check for millions of dollars, what's a principle that you would share with other founders and CEOs?
So I think investing at each stage is very different, right? At the early stage, it's about being able to tell the story, right? And and just going on with what you said about Jobs, right? I mean, one of the other things, I don't know whether it was true or not, because a lot of things about Jobs are now becoming legendary, right? So apparently, in one of I think it was in Pixar or one of the other companies, he's supposed to have said that the most powerful person in the world is a storyteller, right? And hey, I mean, he's right. I mean, I think storytelling, human beings are so attuned to hearing stories, like right from childhood. All that we have learned is through stories. So a lot of the founder's job, especially if you're early stage, is being able to present the story, because really speaking, at that stage, there's nothing much, right? Revenues are almost non-existent, right? Customers are maybe far and few between. Your team is very small, right? You're really battling against heavy odds, right? So at that stage, the ability to tell a story, a compelling story, and obviously having the credibility from a profile perspective, saying, hey, the only two things, right? The story, which is the vision, and can this person do it, right? The only two things which you have at the table at a very early stage, right? So, and as you said, getting somebody to write $3 or $5 or $10 million at almost nothing, right, is not easy at all, right? So yeah, so that's there. But once you start, maturing as a company, right, then data becomes more important, right? Like once your revenue start going up, you have customers, then obviously data is critical, because then you have data, right? So you can present that data, and then hopefully that data should speak for itself. But in the early stage, there is nothing. There's no data. There's nothing, right? So then I think it's only the vision, right, of what you want to create, like the story, right, and your credibility. Right? Can you do it? What is it in you which makes you special to be able to deliver on the vision? Right? These are two things: the vision and the ability to deliver on the vision. I think if these two things are getting checked off, then you're probably good to go to be able to raise money at an early stage. Otherwise, if you're only going to rely on data, then you're going to have to wait till you have data, and that is going to take a while. It's not going to happen in the early stages at all. So yeah, that's basically how the fundraising funnel goes. But as you mature, there's more and more data, and then data should be able to speak.
Yeah. When you think about advice for CEOs of good storytelling, bad storytelling, what's an idea you have on each of those?
No, I think one is that if you are a founder, and you are not able to tell a story, then you should get somebody who can, right? Because it's a very important. Right? It's a very important skill to have, right? Either you have it, if you can cultivate it, damn good, or you get somebody who has it, right? And it's not that difficult to pick out, right? I mean, we've all grown up in groups. Human beings are social. So think about, go back to college, go back to business school, and you feel who are the better storytellers, because in a group of 10, who was the one or two people who were holding everybody's interest, right? That's storytelling, right? I mean, it's not that complicated, right? So you can make out, either you have that skill, right? Or if you don't, then you need to just get it, right? So that's one aspect of it. Bad storytelling would be devoid of emotion, right? Like just presenting facts. That doesn't make a good story, right? Just like if I'm talking about a product and I just talk about benefit all the time, like it's 50 GB RAM and 256 GB hard disk and all that, just facts. That's bad storytelling, right? So yeah, that's the other aspect. If you're very, very factual based, right, it's a good skill to have, but then you need to figure out on the storytelling, right? So I mean, I guess that's what it is, but it's not going to be easy to raise money at the early stage if you can't tell a story. Very different.
Yeah.
I would add one more to the CEO part, which you were saying, and I've been thinking a lot about this as I build out CBREX. I think a CEO is a coach, right? I saw this documentary on Netflix some time ago, which was on coaches. These are on coaches of all types, right? Football coaches, basketball. And these were coaches who took their team to continuous wins over many years. So they were like, had a proven track record. There's one guy, I'm forgetting the guy's name, there's somebody in Europe. He said, look, I can't teach Cristiano Ronaldo how to play football. Right? I mean, the guy is gifted. What will I teach him? But what I can do is I can make out if he's the right person in this team. Right? Because a coach has a team view. So if you're building a company, there are many talented individuals, right, in the organization, right? Super smart. But the key is not how smart they are. The key is, do they fit in this whole group? are they able to play a role which is complementary? Because you can have a super smart person, but maybe the team doesn't need that person for whatever reason, right? And then that person is not a right fit, and then that person has to be let go, right? And that's the job of the CEO. The CEO should be able to have that view, just slightly like a drone, right? Like slightly elevated, to be able to look down at the team and say, hey, I have a bunch of super smart people, no doubt about it. That's why I hired them. But are they fitting in this team, right? Is each of them complementing the other person? If they are not, then even though the person is super smart, knows the domain well, knows the function well, you have to let that person go, right? Because the person is not fitting in the team. And for me, when I saw the documentary, right, I was mind blown. I was like, this is it. This gentleman has pretty much defined, at least for me, the role of a CEO. You're like a coach. You got to make sure everybody fits in the team. Otherwise, you will never, ever be able to build a large company.
What advice do you have for CEOs who feel bad letting anyone go? And they feel guilty that someone's life is going to be worse in the short term because they're going to feel bad about themselves and they're not going to have a, and they struggle to let people go.
I empathize because not that when I let people go, I feel very good about it. I don't think anybody does feel good about it, right? I mean, that's a very normal human reaction. But then that's your job, right? So, I mean, you may not feel good about it, but hey, you got to do it, right? Otherwise, you're in the wrong job, right? As simple as that. If you are not able to do it, then that's not really, then you are not the coach that the team needs. Then you need to get somebody else. All of us feel bad, and I think that's a normal human reaction, and we should do it in a manner which is respectable and graceful, and also look at the financial needs of the person. But that's a role that you've got to do, right? So I don't think there's no getting away from it.
I liked your answer, and I liked your comparison to sports. Of like, if you're the coach of a professional team, and what you're doing is trying to win a championship, and the owners of the team have hired you to do that. The fans are depending on that. The other team members are depending on that. And this person who you actually might really like and who you care about as a person is the reason that goal isn't happening. It's almost like I think about it as like a triage medic. We've had a number of special operations forces guys on here, including like Special Forces, 18 Delta Special Forces medic, talking about like having to make the hard choices. Bomb goes off, there's a bunch of people injured, and he's the first one on scene, and like having to make the tough choices where it's like, it's not that he doesn't want to help everybody, but he's like, no matter what I do with this guy in the next 10 minutes, he's going to die either way. No matter what I do with this guy in the next 10 minutes, he's going to live either way. But this person, the next 10 minutes is going to make the difference if they live or die. It's not that he doesn't want to help those other people. It's that he's not being responsible. He's not filling the role that he said he would fill to spend time with both of those other guys he would like to spend time with, and I kind of feel like it's like the cost of leadership is those hard decisions, right?
Absolutely. And really speaking, I mean, that's a great analogy which you have given, because if you can't take those decisions, right, those 10-minute decisions which you talked about, then you're in the wrong job, right? You should be doing something else, right? Because that's a part of what you're supposed to do. Similarly, in a CEO's job, if you can't take that decision of letting someone go, then hey, you're just in the wrong job.
And don't get me wrong, there's some owners where they own 100% of the stock. They are the shareholder. They're the shareholder, the owner and CEO, and they've defined that what they want to do is provide a good living for people. And like, there's some folks who are like so mission driven that like what they exist to do is like, essentially they're like trying to find customers so they can provide employment. And that's how they define what they're doing. And so like they might make different choices, right? But it's like clarity on like, what are we doing here, right?
I think it goes back to purpose, right? So if and we were trying to define the purpose of CBREX about a month ago. And when I'm saying purpose, I'm not talking about a business plan. purpose is, why do you come to work every day? Right? It's as basic as that. I mean, it's really something deep, right? So when we're talking about building purpose, we're saying, hey, we come to work on a daily basis because we want to build a product, right? That people in the recruiting and staffing industry love, right? That's the purpose, right? The purpose is to build products which people love, right? In our industry, because we're not building products for the whole world, but in our industry, right? If our purpose was to provide employment to 100 people, or if our purpose was to uplift a community, with the example that you gave, then whatever you said is perfect. Because then the purpose, the reason we exist is because, we want to provide employment to 500 people, or we want to do whatever you're talking, the upliftment of the community. And that's perfect. That works well because that ties in with your purpose. But if you're saying my purpose is to build products which people in the recruiting and staffing industry love, then that's your purpose, right? Your purpose is not to provide employment to 500 people because you're not stated.
It could be a side benefit, right, but you have to have a priority. Like one has to be above the other. Otherwise, you got one foot on two skateboards, right?
Correct. And then you're going to fall, right? So as simple as that. I think the purpose is the key, right? A lot of people don't get the purpose right, or they don't spend enough time thinking about it, right? And that's where the dichotomy emerges. Once the purpose is clear, then everything else will fall in place. Everything else comes from the purpose.
Yeah,
you've got to get it right? And you can iterate for it. You can iterate on it for a long time. You don't have to answer the question like tomorrow, but it needs an answer.
Yeah. I know we're kind of winding up for time here. Maybe to wind down, I'll ask. There's so many people that want to be a successful entrepreneur, and then there's some portion of them that actually go try, and then there's statistically hardly anybody that's reached your level of success and built global businesses and exited and invested and then done it again. What do you think is different about you? Or what do you think you've done differently that not everyone else has done that's helped you get the results that not everyone else has gotten?
So only two things, right? One is that I have a huge tolerance for pain, right? Pain, and I'm talking about financial pain, right? Which is bound to come in any kind of entrepreneurial venture, right? You go through a lot of tough times, right? Personally as well as on the business side, right? My threshold level is very high, right? And that's important. I think if your threshold level is low, then you'll have a problem because you are going to come into tough times. There's no business in the world, no matter how big it is today, which has gone through just an upward curve. That's not possible, right? There's an upward, there's down, there's up again, then there's really down, and then it's like a sine wave, right? Go up and down and up and down. And when the down comes, your pain threshold has to be high, right? Otherwise, this is not something meant for you. Again, then you're in the wrong profession. You have to do something else. That's one, and I think for me that's been one of my biggest strengths. The second is I am completely flexible when it comes to the market and the business. Like there's nothing sacred, right? When I decide something, doesn't mean I'm going to do it all the time. I'm going to listen to the market, right? I will do it. I think it's right in my head. But when I go to the market and the market says, you know what, you're a fool, this is wrong, I'm going to change very quickly, right? I'm not going to hold on to it saying, you know what, I think it's a great idea, or I think it's the greatest thing that was, after sliced bread. But the market says it's not. And I quickly change. A lot of people I find don't do that, right? They because they think it's such a great idea themselves, they keep on doing it for a very long time. The market is saying something different. I think the market is supreme, right? You've got to listen to the market, right? You've got to have your ears open. And I am 100% flexible. I'm willing to change anything, right? I'm saying I think it's a great idea, but hey, the market says it's a rotten idea. Change. Try something else. Is that a good idea? No. Try again. So you keep iterating, right? And then you get to that one point, right, where everything fits, and then you're good to go, right? So you keep changing, and you change fast, right? You don't take time over it. You don't pontificate for like weeks and months. Hey, it didn't work. Do something. Just change it, right? and I think those are the two things: the threshold of pain and complete flexibility when it comes to market. I think those are two things that really served me well in the last couple of decades.
That's a great answer. Well, listen, if anybody listening today wants to learn more about CBREX, what's the website?
It's cbr.exchange. Yeah. So that's the website. And CBREX is basically a combination of CBR and EX from exchange. So that's how the word comes into being. But yeah, that's the website, cbr.exchange.
Maybe a final question here. If you could go back and give a younger version of yourself advice, what do you think you'd tell yourself?
That's interesting. I would probably say fail faster than what I ended up doing with some of my ventures. I think I did them for far too long. Before calling it quits. As I said, my pain threshold is high. So the downside of that is that I can take a lot of pain, right? So I think I took more pain than than I should have. I think I should have shut them down, earlier, and saved myself some pain and some time. But yeah, that would be about it. Because I think, look, up and down is fine. That's no problem. So I won't change that for anything. But yeah, that's about it. Some ventures, I think I did them for longer than I should have.
I love it. Okay. Thanks everybody for listening. Bye now.